What is going on, Only Playbook fans? We are officially back for another episode. The season is coming up quickly, so we have so much to talk about. Week 1 of the preseason is officially over. Jake and I have some notes. How are you doing, man? Are you as hyped as I am?
Dude, I can't wait. I was just telling my group chat, so I cannot wait until football season. This summer period, World Cup kind of tides us over a little bit when we have the World Cup, but there's just nothing like hitting that Saturday, Sunday, knowing you have college football, knowing you have NFL football coming on. It's my favorite time of year.
Bro, the idea that every Saturday, Sunday, I'm going to wake up and from like 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., I'm going to flip my phone on DND. I'm not going to get a single text message. Nothing in the outside world matters to me. All that matters is me glued to the TV, glued to my phone and my laptop for fantasy purposes, watching 12 hours of, I guess, some commercial football now. But, dude, I cannot wait. We have so much to talk about. A lot of times in preseason, you know, the starters, the players that are ultimately going to be the impact players in fantasy don't make a lot of impact or they don't play a lot. But we have so many rookies to talk about. It feels like this first week of preseason, they played a lot more starters as a whole across the NFL than I think traditionally we're used to seeing. So I think that brings up some storylines as well. But why don't I let you have more takeaways than me, Jake. So give me one of your first takeaways and we'll just kind of turn this into a really non-official conversation and kind of see how we go with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first one that jumped off the page to me was Stribling for the 49ers. It looked like a really good prospect. Obviously, we have Ricky Pearsall, unfortunately, for my fantasy team, somebody I actually took pretty early on in our Dynasty League, but Ricky Pearsall going to the IR. I think originally my thought with Stribling was probably going to be, hey, this is somebody we stash in Dynasty Leagues. Now I think even in redraft, there might be some potential for him to be an immediate impact player, start to actually get some snaps. And the skill set definitely looks like it's there. He looked really good in their first game.
Yeah, 7 catches, 63 yards, 8 targets in your debut. And again, granted, you're not playing with Brock Purdy. You're playing with Adrian Martinez and Curtis Rourke. But I almost don't know if that's a knock or that's actually better. He's playing with shittier quarterbacks and still producing and not really skipping a beat the same way he produced in college, right? I mean, 6'2", 207, he's rookie on Ole Miss. And we talked about what his potential, like you said, could be. But now with Ricky Pearsall potentially threatening to miss the entire season, they need pass catchers. Mike Evans is old. They signed Mike Evans, but he's also old and he's already dealing with an injury. So there is a world where it's a Evans Stripling, Stripling truly the 1A in this receiving room out of necessity. And right now it seems like he can carry that weight. So what we know is that if he does get the opportunity, the fantasy production has a chance to be there because, again, the biggest thing is we want the players that are going to be on the field the most. And with the receiving room the way it is, he's either going to be the wide receiver 2 immediately, or if Evans is still hurt, he's going to be their wide receiver 1. So we know of obviously CMC and Kittle, and there's so many other people that get involved in that offense, but you got to like what you saw from him and the fact that there's just not a lot of other competition for him. So he's automatically basically the wide receiver 1 right now.
And you plug him into a Kyle Shanahan offense. I always think of like, hey, where are you actually playing as a big part of this too. Browns are a great example. We'll talk about them in a little bit too, but you plug somebody in that offense, you're like, hey, where's this going to go? It's not a great offensive system. When you're plugging into Kyle Shanahan's offense, there's going to be opportunities to find the football. He's really creative. I think Stribling's a player that can really plug and play in a lot of different spots for them. So I think he's going to be a really fun player to keep an eye on throughout the rest of the preseason. Not sure how many snaps he'll get if he is going to end up being one of their top 2 wide receivers. They may start to phase him out here in these next couple of games, but was a really fun player to watch in this first game.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm them, I've already seen enough, to be honest. Like, I don't need to risk him getting hurt as well, already considering how thin the room is and the fact that Kittle and CMC are also injury-prone older players, right? So they need bodies on the field, and I think you've seen enough with Stripling. And it's almost, he plays so much like Juwan Jennings, who is no longer there as well, right? So they're almost similar body types. They're possession receivers. They have big bodies, big frames that can, kind of box out the defender. And so I think there's a lot to like with him, and I think he really just basically plays the Juwan Jennings role. And the thing that Shanahan loves is his receivers to be able to block. And he's coming out of Ole Miss, and they're always physical receivers coming out of Ole Miss that know how to block. So I think that automatically also lets him be on the field more. So, man, you're absolutely right. I think, we'll probably have some mock drafts and we'll talk about kind of how we assess this receiving room. But he's got to be climbing up mock boards like exponentially at this point. All right. So my biggest takeaway, Jake, I didn't want to start off with the Vikings because that just felt like really homery if I did that. So I'm going to leave that for the end. But one of my biggest takeaways I wanted to talk about is the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns are coming into this year with a lot of intrigue with their offense because we don't know who the starting quarterback is. There's obviously some intrigue with some young running backs that they have with Judkins and Simpson. And then this receiving room, Jake, is one of the most intriguing receiving rooms in all of football. Like, if we have consistent quarterback play, we might actually be talking about the Browns as a good offense. And stop me if you've heard that before, because when's the last time we ever said Cleveland Browns, good offense? I don't think that's ever been said in the last 20 years, maybe. So this is I guess the intriguing part, twofold, right? We have these receivers. You have Jerry Jeudy already there. I mean, you have to believe he's probably going to be the wide receiver one just out of the fact that he's the veteran there. Not that I think he's the best receiver, but then you have, 3-4 year vet Said Tillman. And then you have the receivers, Denzel Boston, Casey Concepcion, and you have a couple of wild cards. You still have Isaiah Bond on the roster. Obviously at one point he came with some intrigue, and he does have the speed. And another guy that I still have not quite given up on yet is Malachi Corley, who got drafted like 3 years ago by the Jets. They cut him, and now the Browns have him. So you have 5-6 receivers that the good thing about the room is all of these players, maybe outside of Jeudy, have something to prove, right? And so I think there's just going to be a tremendous amount of competition. And Casey Concepcion was probably one of my second favorite receiver coming out of this class, not named Jordan Tyson, and he's already shining. Like his route running is so crisp. It doesn't matter that he's playing against NFL defenders now. He's still getting open at will. I mean, it's just going to be about him not dropping the football. That was his biggest concern coming into the pros. So the way I'm looking at it is I don't know how this receiving room is going to form out, but you have Jeudy who can play basically everywhere. You have Casey Concepcion who should probably play in the slot. And then you have big body Denzel Boston outside playing like the Y. Like that seems like a insane offense, not to mention Harold Fannin playing your tight end. And you have Quinshon Judkins in the backfield, right? So all of that just means, Jake, that we are just waiting for that final piece, that quarterback. And I think this is the hardest part to have to discuss is you're battling between Deshaun Watson and Shedeur Sanders. Granted, Dylan Gabriel's still there, but I truly don't think this is a competition that he is going to win. I think it is between Watson and Sanders. And the reality is Watson played all right, but we know the history with Deshaun Watson. I think, anytime he steps on the field, he's going to just get booed really, really loudly, rightfully so. And no one really wants to see him succeed. And then you have Shedeur Sanders, who constantly gets hated on, all because of his dad, all because of college. And that actually makes me want to root for him even more. So I think like the optimism in me is hoping that Shedeur Sanders wins his battle, but based on the way they're handling snaps, based on kind of what I saw from Deshaun Watson, I do think that the Browns are probably going to inevitably go back to Watson. I don't know what your thoughts are there.
That's kind of exactly how I felt too. Yeah, it seems like it's kind of trending towards Watson. Now, we still have a couple games. I imagine they're both going to get snaps throughout these next couple of games at least, just to consistently see who's playing better. I think even the Cleveland organization would prefer that Shedeur comes out just because he's somebody that's very easy to root for. Yeah. He's going to sell jerseys simply because of that last name, Sanders, being on the back of a jersey. Yeah. I still have a lot of concern just with Sanders. Like, it doesn't look like some of the things that we hoped would develop have developed. Still holds on to the ball for a long period of time. Mm-hmm. Still kind of just sits in the pocket for quite a bit. Not been incredibly accurate, which I think he looked a little better at Colorado even than he has in the pros. Now, you could argue maybe he was playing with better wide receivers at Colorado than what he's had so far in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. But I think the offense overall is a really fun offense to watch. KC's awesome. I love seeing him also returning punts. I think just finding different ways to use him, how he can – I think he had like a 30-plus yard punt return in that game. Mm-hmm. Plug him in, allow him to start creating some offense immediately. But it will be really interesting to see, like you said, that we haven't really seen wide receiver depth in Cleveland as something as a real possibility. Now you see there are a lot of different options that'll be interesting to see from a fantasy perspective, though. I think of if you're drafting these Browns receivers with the room being so deep, is that going to create an issue where the ball gets spread around so much that you can't have a player that's really crushing it for you like a true wide receiver one? Like, is somebody actually going to emerge as being the top guy in this offense? I mean, right now I would probably assume Judkins would be the number one fantasy scorer, maybe Fannin in that conversation. But Sampson seems to take all the receiving. So it kind of limits Judkins when you're looking at depending on your PPR settings and how you're playing.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? I mean, you're absolutely right. I think Judkins is going to be probably the first guy that gets drafted, and then Harold Fannin shortly after. The receiving room is interesting because what are you trying to get from the receiver that you draft on the Browns, right? If you think catches, like my brain is immediately leading towards Concepcion probably having the most catches. Because, I mean, sure, you could say Jerry Jeudy, but I think we've given Jerry Jeudy enough time to be established in the NFL to be that true number one guy that's going to lead the team in catches. And it's not that he's not capable, but I do just put my money a little bit more towards these younger up and coming receivers. And I think Concepcion has a chance to lead the team in catches, not named Harold Fannin, because I think that dude is probably going to lead the team in catches. But then you think about from a fantasy perspective, if he's going to be your consistent floor guy, but he doesn't have a lot of upside because I don't know how good the Browns offense is going to be in terms of getting to the red zone and actually converting those drives. If that's the case, then maybe Denzel Boston becomes the boomer bust guy that you take a risk on because he has the size. And if he has the size, that means he's more likely to potentially be the 50-50 guy in the red zone or going up for those jump balls, which means he's likely to be potentially the touchdown catcher. And so it's going to be, are you going to be playing for boomer bust? Or are you going to be playing for a floor? But you're right. I think the top two guys are definitely going to be Judkins and Fannin, but I am very intrigued to see how the receiving room shakes out. Maybe these guys will keep getting a little bit more run in the preseason so we can try to draw more conclusions from that. But otherwise, I think it's going to take 3 to 4 weeks in the regular season for us to truly draw conclusions. But right now, if I'm drafting Concepcion and probably drafting Boston out of the receiving room. I'm probably staying away from Jeudy just because we already know what we're going to get from Jerry Jeudy, and I'm not intrigued by that.
So I can go next. I mean, one that really jumped out to me was actually Anthony Richardson, a name that we haven't heard in a little while, a player that I think actually had a really good first preseason game. What I think was exciting for me in watching Richardson, yes, the passing looked good. I think we always knew Richardson had a cannon on him. He can really, really throw the football, even off balance, can just launch balls 50, 60 yards pretty effortlessly. But his legs looked like they were kind of getting back to where they were, which I know a lot of the injuries had been lower body, hip issues, other things that he's been having. So it was really good for me to see. I think he had like 9 rushes, 56 yards and a touchdown. I'm actually spitballing that.
You said 6 for 53 and a touchdown, so you're close. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, I knew it was somewhere in that range, but seeing him actually using the legs and being effective. Now, again, that kind of the flip side of that is it worries you because that's how he got hurt the first time, was running the football. But I still expect Daniel Jones will be the guy originally, but if the Colts team is really struggling, it is somebody to watch out for. They spent a lot of draft capital on Richardson to take him as high as they did. If the team's struggling, it could be a player that, hey, it's worth taking a look at. And Daniel Jones has had his own injury history. So a player that I think just kind of stood out to me as a sneaky player to watch. It was really good. I was a fan of Anthony Richardson at Florida. I loved the way he played. So I would be really happy to see him at least get another opportunity because I thought coming out with the way he ran the ball and the cannon he had, there was a lot of potential that just kind of got drowned out from the injuries.
Yeah, injuries and, just the accuracy concerns, I think, were the biggest things for him. But I think a lot of this, it is injury concerns, is playing time, but confidence, right? I mean, you just see him look a little bit more confident playing just as a whole, making his decisions a lot quicker, deciding when to run, not necessarily knowing that he's going to run the ball before he snaps the ball, but basically just taking what the defense gives him. I think that's the best thing about him is, again, when you're that size and you have that level of athleticism, you're so easily inclined to be like, you know what, quick step drop, don't see one guy, I'm going to take off. But you didn't see that. He was patient. He was going through his progressions. I think 11 for 14, which again, if you could get Anthony Richardson having a completion percentage at that high of a clip, that dude would be an absolute monster and scary for the rest of the NFL. So pair that with his ability to run. So we already know he has the athleticism. You already mentioned that cannon for an arm. It's just about the processing and accuracy. And so that's what you really want to see. But it's hard not to continue to want to believe in players that have this level of caliber or upside and untapped potential, because all it takes is it to like snap together. And if it snaps together, then it could be truly something special. So definitely something to hone in on. And you brought up a good point. Daniel Jones is coming off of his own major injury, right? And he's also had injury concerns. He also runs the ball and is mobile. So he also carries the risk that he can get hit when he's running the ball. So definitely think like this isn't the end of Richardson and this isn't the last we've seen of Richardson. At least I hope not. We see him get another opportunity in the NFL, but he did look good. It is intriguing. But you always just try to, take it with a grain of salt. I don't think the Patriots played a ton of their first team, obviously coming off a team that, made the Super Bowl. So they probably had less to prove with their starters or their ones than most other teams. So that is the one kind of grain of salt thing is a lot of times defenses will play very, very vanilla defenses and coverages in preseason. But if we want to kind of be the glass half full side, we got to be optimistic about Anthony Richardson because he was so bad, so injury prone, and his accuracy was so bad that, we'll give him his flowers for this moment right here. So for me, the Seattle Seahawks, Jake, are top of mind for me because, I drafted Jadarian Price in our Dynasty League. I'm very high on him, and they took him in the first round. But there's all this rumbling from the Seahawks camp about this stupid Sorry, not stupid. I shouldn't say that. That was the emotion. This player, George Holani, who is the backup running back right now with Zach Charbonnet injured. He is also a guy that actually played at Boise State before Ashton Genty got there. So he has some prowess. He's obviously got some pedigree, and he's a good running back. He's shifty. He's almost like a Sharbs 2.0. So he fits that price to Sharb's 1-2 punch perfectly while Charbonnet is hurt. So I do fear that he could potentially get that level of work, but I don't know, because again, preseason is all about blowing smoke. It's all about like, we give these guys opportunities and sometimes they flash, but who they're playing, the defenses they're playing, and how intense it is may not quite match the regular season level. So are you buying any of this George Holani smoke being the RB2 and truly dipping into Jadarian Price's playing time? Or do you think this is all just smoke?
It's tough, because I see kind of both sides of it. Where do I think he's going to get carries early on in the season? I definitely do. Actually think that he'll get some carry. I don't think it's going to be running back one looks. I think Price is going to handle the bulk of that load. But I think Seattle's just kind of shown over the last couple of years that they really don't have an interest in having a pure running back one that gets all the touches. I don't think that changes simply with Charbonnet being out. So I think probably early on in the season, we will actually see him get touches. And now how much he's dipping into Price's touches, I think will largely depend on what he actually looks like. I wasn't incredibly impressed with his first game. He got a fair amount of touches, but yards per carry weren't incredible in the game. So, I mean, he didn't really show anything that said like, wow, this guy just has to be on the field in my mind.
Yeah.
But I do think probably week 1, 2, maybe even trickling into week 3. A lot of it depends too how long Charbonnet's out. But I think we probably will still see some split. Your hope as a Price fantasy owner would be that he's not playing the Charbonnet role from last year, which is just a touchdown vulture and continues to get all of the touchdowns. But I could see that being a possibility early on, where you see a lot of the split touches, letting Price get used to the offense, learning the playbook. Because I think a lot of it too is going to be how quickly does he get up to speed? Is he ready to go week 1? Is he familiar with the playbook, knows everything that's going on, or do you lean back on somebody that's been in the system a little bit, knows the playbook a little bit more effectively, and kind of still split those touches? Which I think I lean towards them probably splitting a little bit more in the early weeks.
Yeah, knowing your RB2 is already coming into the season hurt, I don't think they want to risk having their first-round rookie running back, who, again, is not the biggest running back himself, also risk an injury, and then you have Holani as your true starting running back. So I do think you're right. They're probably split carries, but the fear is it's a split where he's just spelling Price and not, like you said, playing the Sharps role where he's vulturing touchdowns, being the third down guy. And at that point, you're just like, all right, if you're only getting Price for first and second down production, then that's not the best place to be, because we know Seattle also likes to run a lot of play action and use Darnold with his arm, with JSN and everything like that. So you're just really limiting the amount of touches that he can get, which obviously limits the amount of fantasy output that he can produce.
And we talked a little bit about it, I think, in one of our last videos, but Price never really was in a position where he was handling the bulk of the workload anyway in his Notre Dame situation. So I think that's kind of the flip side of that, is we need to look at, is Price actually somebody that can handle 20 plus touches a game, which I lean towards that he is. He just wasn't needed to do so in his situation. But I think that's something to keep an eye out for too in those early weeks of the season, is he actually a 20 plus carries a game type of running back? Or does he actually work better? Because I think that was some of the draw of Seattle taking him to an extent, is he's been familiar in a situation where he could come on the field and be subbed in at random times and still be explosive. He doesn't need 25 touches to get going. I think of like a Rico Dowdle, that just gets better as he touches the ball more. Price doesn't need that. He's somebody that can come in and be explosive on his first touch because he's used to sitting behind Love.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. What else you got for me?
So another big one, we can touch on the Raiders offense really quickly. So number one, I wanted to start with Fernando Mendoza. I think he looked really good, kind of showed that 1-1 potential of why he was drafted in that area. I thought he looked phenomenal. The other one that I would want us to touch on a little bit would be Mike Washington Jr. Obviously Ashton Genty being there, he's not going to be the running back one, but how much can he actually dip into some of those touches? Is he kind of a clear-cut running back two in this situation? Because I thought he looked sneaky, really explosive, and really good for that offense. I mean, take it with a grain of salt, right? It's preseason. You're playing against a softer defense, but I think he looked a lot better than I expected him to. So both of those two really stood out to me. Mendoza, just kind of as advertised, looks really good. and then Mike Washington Jr. being a sneaky player.
Yeah, I think you and I have always been of the camp that Fernando Mendoza warranted the 1-1 pick, right? I mean, I think in this draft, with not as much high top end talent, quarterback talent not being quite up there as well in terms of competition, I think Mendoza was clear cut the 1-1, and you agree. And I do think he showed all of that and then some. I think the processing, the decision making, all of that, it's just. It's really easy for the speed of the NFL to just seem a lot faster when it's your first official, time running snaps and playing against real live defense. And it did not feel that way for Mendoza at all. He was, getting to his spots, reading his progressions, and really just being decisive. And I think that's all you can really ask for. Decisive accuracy. There are a couple times where I felt like he could have maybe evaded the pocket, and we know he has the ability to use his legs. I think that's just going to come with comfort. And again, overall game speed and him just understanding, where everybody is at what point. But again, a lot to really like. And the Mike Washington thing, Jake, I think that is a real concern for Ashton Jeanty fantasy owners, because again, this dude's a bowling ball. Okay. So he's like 6'2", 230 pounds. Jeanty is like 210 pounds, but he's like 5'8". So he's also very stocky. But again, Jeanty is a superstar. You probably want to have longevity for a guy like that. And I think, again, the NFL has continued to evolve into we don't want a true workhorse unless he is just a one-of-one type guy, Saquon, Bijan, those guys. And until you have somebody like that, it's just so much smarter for your offense as a whole to, spell your superstar or your star with another guy who's plenty capable. And right now, Mike Washington, again, I think we came into the season impressed with him at college, and I did think he was plenty capable, but I do think there's a true concern, at least from a fantasy standpoint, that Mike Washington could be a touchdown vulture for Ashton Jeanty, as well as maybe dip into some of his carries. But again, don't get me wrong, I don't think that's going to stop me from drafting Ashton Jeanty, because the upside of him is still really high, and he had a pretty down rookie year because the offensive line was so bad and the offense as a whole was really bad. So you want to buy his stock a little bit lower this year coming into year 2. But again, with that being said, Mike Washington is absolutely a name to watch. And if you do draft Jeanty, I do think you should draft Washington as a handcuff in that same draft for sure.
That's actually an offense that I'm kind of sneaky excited to watch throughout this season. I didn't think I would have said that coming into this year either, but they just have a lot of really fun weapons, players that I've kept an eye on for a while. Even like a Thornton Jr., who's an electric speed player. I think a lot of potential there for him to be a player to keep an eye on. I believe Trey Tucker's still there too, right? With
I think so.
On the outside, speed demon. So it's that's actually a really fun team to watch. I think last year everything looked a lot worse because they didn't have the quarterback to hold the offense together. Mm-hmm. Could open up a lot more for a player like Jeanty. Brock Bowers, is going to be unreal with Fernando Mendoza playing quarterback. Yeah. So that's
and if Mendoza doesn't start, right? Even if Mendoza doesn't start, Kirk is going to fit in there just fine and be able to run that offense fine, to where he's still absolutely going to contribute to fantasy production for these superstars. So and I don't know how, but you and I have started hyping up the Cleveland Browns and the Las Vegas Raiders offense of all offenses.
Quite a start to the podcast, dude.
Hot take for sure. We'll see if that ends up panning out for us. But no, it's fun to be intrigued with these shitty teams because they've been bad for so long. So it's nice to see them actually get players that will allow us to actually invest in them from a fantasy perspective and not have that's the one team that I don't want anybody, any player from that team. I hate when there's a team like that. So it's nice to have a piece of the pie for every team if you can.
Do we start firing up the Jets next, or?
Oh my God. Yeah. It's actually crazy. I mean, there are some Jets I want to talk about, but let me jump into real quick the Ravens Eagles. I want to make this one quick. Jakobi Lane is a receiver. We've been still searching for the Ravens finding a true receiver, a true number one. And while I'm still on the Zay Flowers hype train, I do think this could be a year that Zay Flowers truly becomes that wide receiver one. Jakobi Lane is a really, really nice player. 3 for 38 in this preseason debut. Looked crisp, smooth, ran good routes, was in the positions that he needed to be in. And I do think, again, he's also another player that can threaten with his size. So there is a world where him and Zay Flowers make a really, really nice 1-2 pairing. And if that's the case, then you obviously have the and Mark Andrews is still there. They don't have Likely anymore. Did they sign another tight end, or did I dream that?
They drafted 2.
They drafted two. Yeah. That's right. So they're putting a lot of size around Zay Flowers. You have Jakobi Lane, who's 6'4", 205, right? So it's a perfect pairing to what Zay Flowers can provide. And again, you have the big size of the tight end. So I think this team is building just an offense that can potentially not be stopped. And if Lamar stays healthy, plays to his potential, you already have Derrick Henry, who's going to demand a lot of defensive attention. Jakobi Lane is going to be couldn't be that final red zone threat that Lamar Jackson's looked for 3, 4, 5 years now, that, sometimes his tight ends fulfill, but it's really nice to have that true wide receiver that's a big bodied guy that can go up and get it. So at 6'4", a lot to like with Jakobi Lane.
Another one that kind of stood out to me too that we didn't touch on with the Ravens is Elijah Sarratt. Actually had a very good game as well. It'll be interesting to see kind of where he falls in this offense, because he's a little bit of a different player than how Jakobi Lane looks, but he was really good throughout his college career. How much game time he actually gets, because I tend to lean a little bit more like you. Jakobi Lane's probably the better fit when you're putting him across from Zay Flowers. But I think Sarratt could be a player that sneaks in, gets some good touches as well. You also think with the Ravens, they're not a pass-first team historically. They're going to be running the ball a lot more with Lamar and Derrick Henry. So, Sarratt's one of those guys I'm like, is he kind of left to the wayside just simply because this is a team that's not going to be able to feed 3 different players at the wide receiver position? So it'll be interesting to see which way they go with that. I agree with you. I tend to lean a little bit more towards Jakobi Lane kind of stepping in and filling that spot initially. But did just want to mention Sarratt because I think he had a good game and he got quite a bit of volume in the game too. So
what do you have, like 7 catches or something like that?
Yeah, it was something like that, maybe 6.
Yeah, 6, 7 catches like that. Yeah, he definitely had a good game. 6 for 66, right? So very good game, actually. 7 targets. And I think you're right. The way I see this working out is obviously if you're in a PPR format, I think Zay Flowers is going to be the most intriguing player on the team, not named the tight ends. And then if you're looking at like a half PPR or a standard format, I do think what's going to happen is, even when Bateman had his highs and lows, he'd have some games where he'd catch touchdown bombs and stuff like that. I think you're going to have that Sarratt and Jakobi Lane potentially have like 1 week, one guy goes off or has a good game. 1 week, another guy goes off and has a good game, because I do think that 3 of these receivers do complement all of their skill sets really well with what Zay Flowers does, what Sarratt does. Sarratt's basically the intermediate guy, but he has a little bit more size. And you have Jakobi Lane who can take the top off at his 6'4" size. And Zay Flowers does all of the other stuff, right, with being a little bit undersized. So I think they all pair really perfectly well together. But you brought up the biggest point here is the Ravens aren't a pass first offense because they're predicated on running the ball. We could see like, a deep bomb to Elijah Sarratt for a touchdown. And, if you somehow started him, he gets you the fantasy points you need. But from a volume perspective, if we're putting guys out as starters in fantasy football, but based on volume and how much they're going to be on the field, I don't know yet what the depth chart's going to look like with Lane and Sarratt, but both of these guys have intrigue and worth monitoring for the remainder of the preseason.
I was going to say, I think both of these guys are good stashes for flex spots. Zay Flowers is the only one I would actually consider putting in my 1 or 2 wide receiver slots right now, just purely because I tend to not like drafting players on run-heavy teams to begin with. The Eagles are a great example of that. A lot of people would jump up the boards to grab players like Smith or at the time, A.J. Brown. I've never been big on drafting those players to be my wide receivers anyway. I just really don't like to have guys that are in a run-first offense playing wide receiver for me. So I think both of these guys could be worth drafting, holding on to them in a bench spot and potentially plug-and-play flex spots in certain matchups. But I think still Zay Flowers would be the only one I would draft as a guy I would be willing to consistently start on a week by week basis.
Do you want to talk about Ty Simpson real quick?
Yeah, that was actually where I was going to go next. Is dude, Sean McVay just it's so ridiculous. No matter
did he do it again? Did he do it again, Jake?
Honestly, it feels like both you and I liked Ty Simpson to begin with. I think we both thought that he had a good skill set. And I think the last season at Alabama was not reflective necessarily of what Ty Simpson's skill set was, because the offensive line wasn't what it needed to be. The run game was the worst I've seen at Alabama, maybe in my lifetime.
It was so bad.
So the entire offense was solely based off of what Ty Simpson could do, and he was asked to do so much. Now, he's not going to start this year, right? Unless something happens to Stafford. We're not going to see Ty Simpson this season.
Which,
so as far as
Stafford's old enough to where it's a possibility that he gets hurt.
Yeah, for sure. I think if you draft Stafford, probably worth holding on to Ty Simpson if you have a deep enough bench where you can afford to hold kind of a quarterback that you just grab and hold on to as a safety net. If not, if something were to happen, waiver wires are going to go nuts for a guy like Ty Simpson, because you plug him into that offense, you look at the receiving core, he's not going to be asked to do nearly as much with the 2 running backs that they have. And he looks really, really good. And one other thing before I pass it to you, I wanted to touch on Max Klare was one that really jumped out to me for them as well. I think he had like 7 catches in this game on 8 targets. So looks like a really good safety net. There's not really a tight end there. They have a lot in the room, but there's no one that jumps out to me and just says like, wow, he has to be tight end 1. So this is a guy I think is worth keeping an eye on too, that could easily work his way into with the consistent hands. Like I could see him being a productive player for them going forward too.
I think so too. And again, let's not lose sight of the fact that obviously Stafford's great coming off an MVP year, but he also is old. He's injury prone. He can get hurt. Timing, rhythm, and the way he ran the offense was what was most impressive. But I think I feel like you and I talked about how if Ty Simpson went into like a Kyle Shanahan type offense and he would thrive. And I mean, a la Sean McVay, similar type of offense, and he's already thriving. Yep. I know it's a small sample size week 1 in preseason, but again, there's people that will immediately come in and struggle, even though they're supposed to look the part. And there's people that were like, oh, maybe he'll come in and look okay. And he definitely just looked the part immediately. And so that was very impressive. And again, if we're talking about dynasty, he is an absolute dynasty darling because Stafford, again, could just have one more year left. That offense isn't going anywhere. They still have, Blake Corum once Kyren Williams is gone. They still have Puka, who's really, really young, and they're going to continue to build the offense probably around those guys. So even just beyond this year for a dynasty stash, he's worth it. He's worth it as a handcuff for Stafford this year if you're desperate. But there was a lot to like with him. It just, again, the game didn't look too fast for him. And I think that's always the first thing that I'm always trying to notice, specifically with running backs or quarterbacks or receivers, guys who, need to understand the timing of the offense to make what they do happen. And with quarterbacks specifically. So I think the game just did not look too fast for him. And that was the biggest takeaway for me.
Yeah, I think it's a really fun player. I now wish I would have taken him in some dynasty startups. I was a little bit nervous just with how he was actually going to look. Now I think I may be regretting that a little bit of not getting some Ty Simpson stock. And maybe I'll make a move to just add him to the roster just so I can have a little bit of stock there. Because even at Alabama, I watch a ton of college football too. So I thought he was really good. I really thought he was a really good quarterback for Alabama. And I think a lot of people were down on him and surprised at 13 because of what last year looked like. But I think in a more normal year, if he would have had a good run game, I think 13 would have been like, yeah, that makes sense in most cases.
It wasn't, the run game was bad. Ryan Williams, their star receiver, was a massive disappointment, right? To the point where I think Jeremy Bernard was probably their best receiver last year, who, good, solid receiver. He's, drafted for the Steelers, I believe. And so he's going to absolutely make an impact, but again, not the level of top tier overall talent around the quarterback that we're used to seeing at Alabama programs, where usually the quarterback is the weakness and everybody else is like good around him. Last year, it truly felt like Ty Simpson was the one good piece and he was elevating everybody else around him. So no, I'm with you there. Again, and it's at this point, how can you doubt Sean McVay? How can you do it? He drafted Jared Goff. They took him to Super Bowl. He's like, you know what? Took me to Super Bowl. Didn't win it. So I'm trading him for an MVP who's never done anything, became MVP, took him to the Super Bowl, and now he's got Ty Simpson. So yeah, at this point, his track record's so good that I just believe every quarterback he drafts is going to end up being good. And he looked the part so far in week 1.
Yeah.
I got one more, Jake. My last one here is saving the best for last. The Minnesota Vikings and the Giants squared off. And the reason this is just worth talking about is they had signed Kyler Murray. He was obviously in some sort of a camp battle with JJ McCarthy, even though I truly don't think it was much of a battle. I think it was Kyler's job from the minute he was signed. I just think they gave JJ the battle overall motto just so he could potentially work hard and see if it could bring out the best in him. But I don't know. The preseason was pretty hit or miss for both of them. The thing that I noticed the most that is going to be important for fantasy players and people maybe who hadn't watched Kyler as much and maybe don't pay attention to the Vikings as much is the Kevin O'Connell offense is a lot of under center. 6 of the 9 snaps that Kyler Murray had were from under center. Kyler Murray historically is one of the least under center quarterbacks in the NFL. Everything he does out of shotgun. So this is a massive adjustment to Kyler Murray. And the reason why is Kyler Murray is going to have his back to the defense a lot when he's, under center and running play action. And again, one of the biggest weaknesses for Kyler Murray is when he has his back to the defense, when he's turning back around because of his size, because the offensive line is directly in front of him, his vision isn't quite there. And that's where a lot of the middle of the field stuff gets convoluted. So he's always throwing outside the numbers, which is where he can see. Now, again, the problem with that is Kevin O'Connell's offense is predicated on throwing everything across the middle, intermediate throws to Justin Jefferson and Addison. So that's the biggest thing is it seems like Kevin O'Connell isn't necessarily adjusting his offense to Kyler Murray, but making Kyler Murray run the offense that he wants him to run. Again, only 9 snaps, but it's definitely something to monitor. But the good thing about that is if they run the ball as much as they did this first week, Jake, which again, the first carry, Aaron Jones, 18-yard run, they were really, really hell-bent on establishing the running game. And I think this year, more so than last 2-3 years, Kevin O'Connell mentioned that they're going to really hammer the running game home. And if that's the case, then there's going to be a lot of play action off of that. And the play action off of under center running games is the fact that Kyler Murray is one of the fastest quarterbacks in the NFL. So if you get him out in space on a bootleg, then, and let's say the defense falls for that, then those are really, really big chunk running plays, potentially rushing touchdowns that are going to be out there on the field for Kyler Murray to get. So there is a double-edged sword there where I don't know what the passing prowess of him is going to look like when he's always been everything is in front of me, so I can potentially look at everything, versus I have to put my back to the defense, so I have to be processing just a little bit faster the minute I turn back around. So that is definitely the biggest thing that I noticed, but it was okay. He was, I think, 2 for 4 with like 10 yards, so nothing really super impressive, but ran the offense well. And so that's definitely something to monitor, because we know what the upside of Kyler Murray can look like. We know that the weapons around him are some of the best in the NFL. They may have the best receiving room in the NFL right now when Juwan Jennings is your wide receiver 3. So if that's the case, then nothing is stopping this offense from flourishing. Kyler just has to do his part. So that was my biggest takeaway from that game.
Yeah, I completely agree. And for me, I just, to a point, trust KOC to just figure it out and make that offense work. I think, of course, the biggest thing there is just Kyler's health. And I think part of that could be a benefit to him staying in the pocket a little bit more. Maybe he's not running the ball quite as much as he did in the past. I think Kyler has a pretty good arm. I do trust him to be able to run the offense, especially with how KOC has it structured, getting the ball out a little bit faster. I think I do personally like him better than JJ. I don't know your thoughts, but I do think that I would lean more towards him. As a Justin Jefferson fantasy owner in Dynasty, I actually really like the move of having Kyler step in. Of course, the big thing is, hey, is the health going to be there? Are we able to keep him healthy for a full 16, 17 game season, which I think will be yet to see. One other thing with the Vikings game I wanted to just check with you on, and didn't bring this up beforehand, so kind of putting you on the spot a little bit. But
Sure.
Claiborne, is the hype actually there? Like, do we think that I feel like I have to bring him up, being a North Carolina guy? He's a Wake Forest guy. Have to bring him up. Obviously, an aging running back room there in Minnesota. Is there an opportunity we actually see this guy get some meaningful snaps this year and become a big piece of this offense as a running back? Or do you think this is one of those, hey, dynasty stash him, maybe good for the future type of guys?
It's a great question, Jake. I think it could go either way, but I do think I would still risk drafting him in redraft, simply because the age of the running back room in the Vikings backfield is pretty high. Aaron Jones is at the age where he's most likely, you're almost guaranteed that he's going to miss some games. Jordan Mason obviously doesn't have much pass catching prowess to his game. Now, Claiborne doesn't have as much either, but it seemed it was more so because they didn't utilize him that way. But the biggest thing about Claiborne that I think is different than the other 2 running backs is breakaway speed. And I think as the Minnesota Vikings, have not had a running back that has that level of breakaway speed since like peak Dalvin Cook. And so that's been a while. And so I think we're still searching for that. Jones, Mason, they do their parts well, but they don't have that true top end speed, can hit a home run and completely change the game. And that's where I think Claiborne can. And so I do think he's going to get some playing time, because we're going to want to see what he can do. But as with any rookie, as with any guys that typically come in and leverage their athleticism beyond everything else, like, it's going to be tough for him to stay on the field on third downs if he can't pass protect, which again, I think that's an area that he's known to have come into the NFL needing to work on. His pass catching, again, is not quite where you would think somebody that's as fast as he is should be. Like, I think, you would want pass catching game that complements your speed, right? Because it's like, give me the ball in open space and let me work. And so if he doesn't have that, that's where my fear lies. But again, it's not for the fact that I don't think he's going to get touches because of the nature of the age range of the room. I think people are bound to get hurt. It's just a matter of KOC. It really always looks for fundamentally sound guys. That's why he loves Aaron Jones. It doesn't matter if he's 33 years old. He keeps trying to bring him back, because he knows he'll pass protect. He knows he's always going to be in the right places, and he's always going to be protecting his quarterback. And so I think that's the biggest thing that's going to hold Claiborne back from getting playing time early. But from a dynasty standpoint, yes, absolutely stash him, because again, he could be the starting running back for the Vikings next year. And even in redraft, I think he's worth a really late flyer because of the injury concern and because he offers what none of the other running backs offer, which is the top end breakaway speed.
I had to throw him in there. Being a North Carolina guy, spent 4 years at Wake Forest, had to see if my guy actually has some opportunities to get on the field.
Yeah.
I have a couple more I can run through like pretty quickly.
Go for it.
Guys that just stood out was Emmett Johnson for the Chiefs looked good. Potential sneaky running back 2 candidate. Now, how much weight I put into that is kind of tough because the Chiefs are on the opposite end of the spectrum of like a Ravens offense where when Patrick Mahomes plays, the offense runs through Patrick Mahomes and he's going to be passing the ball a lot. You have Kenneth Walker there, but Kenneth Walker's gotten hurt quite a bit throughout his career. He's been banged up. I can't really remember the last time we saw him play a full 17-game season without really missing at least 1 or 2 games or having some hamstring issues, other things popping up. So he looked really good for me. I think there's some potential there, especially early on. If Mahomes, it's leaning towards, I think now he's going to actually look to play week 1 from what I've been reading. But if he does miss a game or 2, it could be a heavier run game where they start to split him in a little bit. So he was a player I wanted to bring up that I thought looked really good as a rookie, and I'm curious to see kind of where he falls.
Yeah, I think his biggest early impact is going to be on third down. So I think Emmett Johnson has the ability to pass catch. He's very, very shifty. He doesn't have the breakaway speed that maybe you would like. And I think that's ultimately what's going to stop him from being a true number 1 running back. But I've made this comparison, I think, in the pre-draft process. And again, I still think it holds very true. He reminds me a lot of Bucky Irving coming out, right? Didn't actually have the numbers in the combine, but he's just a shifty, smart running back that knows how to find space and gets open. And he can pass and he can catch the ball out of the backfield. So absolutely similar play styles there. It's just about, again, if Emmett Johnson can stay healthy as being just a spell back for Ken Walker, then I think he's going to have some value. But the thing with Ken Walker that is intriguing to me as well is he's only ever been in a system where they have proactively tried to put him in a running back by committee, right? So the Seahawks always loved Charbonnet or somebody else. Are the Chiefs finally going to give him the runway to be a true running back 1 based on how they signed the contract that they give him? Or we know the Chiefs also, even with Pacheco or Hunt or whoever, they always had 2 or 3 guys also taking shares of the backfield. So if that's how they truly are going to play, then I think Emmett Johnson has some value for sure, specifically catching passes out of the backfield. Mahomes does love to dump the ball off. He's very, very good at utilizing his running backs. Remember the year where Jerick McKinnon caught like 8 or 9 touchdown passes out of the backfield? Like that is a possibility. Mahomes doesn't care how he wins. He's going to find ways to beat you. So could Emmett Johnson be the X factor to the offense that we just don't know anything about yet? Absolutely. And again, being a Husker guy, I have a little bit of bias towards him.
Another one, probably not as big of a focus this year, Drew Allar really stood out to me for the Steelers, had a big game for them. I think a lot of people kind of forgot that Drew Allar was going into the year kind of hyped up as a first-round prospect, and he's kind of in a similar situation. I don't want to compare the two and say he's as good as Ty Simpson. I think Ty Simpson's a better player. But similar situation where Drew Allar at Penn State, you have to think about kind of how the season went for Penn State. They fired their coach midway through the season. And everything went off the rails. James Franklin got fired like 5-6 games into the season. So how much of that affected how Drew Allar looked in the season? How much of that potential that we saw a year or 2 ago is still there for him? I thought he looked really good. Obviously won't be the guy this year unless something happens to Rodgers, but I think definitely somebody worth keeping an eye on. The other piece of this too is 2027 is a pretty good quarterback class. So there's easily the potential they just go and grab somebody that they would much rather start there. But, I think he did at least kind of pop for me where I said, okay, like Drew Allar still does have some of that upside and the potential that we talked about going into this previous college football season. So I think somebody worth keeping an eye on. And Aaron Rodgers is also, could easily get hurt as well. The guy's 40 plus years old. So if something does happen to him, they have a lot of guys there that it could be Will Howard, some other people, but Drew Allar, somebody to keep an eye on.
Yeah, he's got the physical traits for sure. He's literally got the stature that every NFL team will be like, oh yeah, that's the prototypical size that we would want. My issue with him coming into the process was his mechanics were just so like, I didn't think he had replicatable mechanics on a down to down basis. And that was my biggest fear is like, you just can't have that as a quarterback. Like you have to have, mechanics that you can be like, I can do this same thing over and over and over again. And it just felt like every time Drew Allar dropped back, either his footwork looked different every time, the way he threw the ball looked different. I don't know. He had like a little hitch in his throw. Now, granted, he looked a little bit better now. But I do think a lot of his, playmaking was also, catch after the run from his receivers and stuff like that. So I appreciated what he did, but until I see kind of a true reformation in his mechanics, I'm going to have a hard time getting behind Drew Allar personally.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can agree with that. And then 2027 is lining up to be an absolutely sick quarterback class. Yeah. So I think like we could see maybe 5 or 6 go in the first round if things play out the way. We'll probably get more into as we get into the season, 2027 players we're keeping an eye on. But really 2 other quick ones are just guys that I think are players that are going to be drafted consensus across the board in redraft, but just guys that jumped out to me. Jeremiyah Love looked phenomenal. He definitely looked like that Saquon Barkley level running the football, like absolutely insane. And then the other one's DJ Moore, being a Panther guy. I had to bring this guy up. Do we have a real potential wide receiver 1 season out of DJ Moore with Josh Allen? Like, could he be a top 12 wide receiver playing with Josh Allen?
With Josh Allen, bro, anything is possible. So I would not rule that out. And we talked about this right before we hit the record. The difference in DJ Moore when we compare his age to other players around his age is he doesn't have the tread on his tires because he's never even had the opportunity to be the true number 1. Like on the depth chart, he's been the number 1, but has he ever really in his entire career got fed the amount of targets and catches that a true number 1 should get? Maybe 1 year, but not enough to where you think based on his age, he's got enough tread on his tires. So I absolutely am buying in on the DJ Moore hype. I would want him in redraft for sure, especially playing with Josh Allen. That quarterback wide receiver stack could be deadly this year for sure.
Oh yeah.
Anything else, Jake?
I think that's all the ones I had.
I don't have anything else. I think we could talk all day if we really wanted to, but that was week 1 of the NFL preseason. Some of the things that stood out to me and Jake. If you're watching, hit the like, hit the subscribe. It helps spread the word. Our socials are Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. I am Sweetcar. That is my co-host, Jake. We will be back next week, hopefully, to do another episode. We'll see you guys later.